Hello, beautiful people. I wanted to talk to you today about children that are carrying the lineage imprint. And this is so important and it's really sacred. And I hope that you'll stick around. I want to share a few things that I have found in my time in working with people. And it makes a lot of sense in the research. And I'll share that towards the end, some of the links to the research. So let's dig in. So some of the folks that have reached out to me are parents. No surprise, right? And they have been asking the question about like, well, how do I know if my child might be carrying something, or could something that's going on for my kid be an indicator that maybe there's more work that I could do in my lineage to help heal some of that? And I first want to share that if you are recognizing that, first of all, that's the first step. Second of all is that we have found that even when one person in the family starts doing the work, that other people all of a sudden start sharing things that they hadn't shared before, or that a child starts acting differently just because sort of the parent is doing something different and has recognized that this is something they want to work on. So I know that this can be a little touchy, but again, I see this as an opportunity because I have so many people who come in and they want to work on conditions that modern medicine hasn't been able to help them with. They failed different therapies. Their children have had marginal success. I do see a lot of kids actually who are adopted who unfortunately had very humble beginnings, meaning they were adopted because unfortunately they were children of severe drug addiction. So anything from meth to crack to pretty much anything that you can imagine. And so, that imprint, that lineage imprint really can stay with that child, especially even as their adopted parents are really trying to do a great job. And so they're like, hey, listen, I can really tell there's something going on there. And that's where I find that craniosacral therapy can be really helpful for a lot of children. But let's talk about some of these things, because most parents, there's such a relief when they can actually talk about it in a meaningful way. A lot of times they hold it, they carry it. There's a lot of shame or guilt or blame, and I don't want people holding that. That's not going to help you, and it's not loving and kind to you, and it's not loving and kind to your child either. And it's coming up for a reason, but not one for you to hold on like that. So let's talk about what we can do. So I want to share about the research first, however, and what we have found in the literature, the research, is that there are certain kids that we recognize or conditions that are lineage imprints, intergenerational and transgenerational imprints. And one of those is actually sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. And it took us some time to recognize this, but it's around the serotonin receptors in the brain, and also serotonin that's throughout the body. And what we found for these children is there's supposed to be something called like a fail-safe in the brain that allows oxygen to still be there, but it fails for these children. And what we have been able to recognize is that this is an imprint, a lineage trauma imprint, and it's around a gene called SRD5A2. And for these individuals, these children, it has actually failed. And that's why it actually might help them to be in a different position because of that. And so it's just really interesting to kind of think about. I just, wanted to share that. Second is another, a lot of conditions that we think about these days are getting a lot of hype is ADD and ADHD. So let me explain why this can happen. So if you remember, and if not, that's okay, I'll give you a little cliff note, is that cortisol is our main hormone when we're thinking about lineage imprints. Cortisol is basically a hormone that gets released from the adrenal glands. Think of it as like your energy, your battery pack, sort of like an Energizer bunny. It actually is your energy. Well, cortisol is what allows us to wake up, and it should be the highest in the morning, and then it dips down throughout the day, and it's the lowest at night so that you can fall asleep. Well, the problem is when you've had adverse childhood experiences or PTSD and there's lineage imprints there, is that cortisol is really low. It'll go maybe high initially and then it drops out and it's really low. Well, what happens is these children, so if mom has low cortisol because of that, the child will mimic that in utero and then also when they come out. So again, that's why we can see changes in their hormonal pattern. They may have a hard time getting up in the morning, but yet they're having to stimulate themselves to stay awake. it makes sense, right? So the body's trying to stay awake to basically try to make more cortisol so that they can stay awake and maybe learn in school. And so most of these children, if we look at mom's pattern and also the child's pattern, they're both really low. So we have to do cortisol support for these children. So the ADD, ADHD is seen as a lineage imprint. So I just wanted to share that, and that's related to that cortisol. So you may see dysregulated blood sugar for them. Also for parents, you may see maybe they're up late at night, they don't have appropriate sleep patterns. So that's what we have to really work on, is getting them a regular schedule, getting them the right food in again, and then helping their cortisol patterns, and sometimes even just getting the right exercise. And then one of the other things that I wanted to also share is that we've seen in the research is that autism is also a lineage imprint. And we have seen this in many, many studies. And in fact, there is one study that I find really interesting around what's called oxytocin. And oxytocin, if you remember, is the cuddle hormone that I've talked about in one of the other videos. But basically, oxytocin can also be mirrored in our, not just in mom, but then mirrored in the child. And in some cases, we've seen that a lot of individuals with autism or on the spectrum will have really low oxytocin. And so again, if we think about it, oxytocin is also related to our ability to communicate and connect, eye contact, verbal communication. And if we kind of think about that, we don't typically see that with some of our kids or even adults that might be on the spectrum. And so if we can try to help with actually allowing them to make their natural oxytocin, that can be really, really helpful. And some of the research that's been done with oxytocin, if people are doing it as like an actual supplement or actually as a drug, is that it actually can have adverse outcomes. And it can, unfortunately, has a similar structure to another hormone that can actually make them more jittery, make them more violent, make them more and act out. So it's not something we want to do, but we can find that in the research that we can actually increase our oxytocin. I talk about that in a previous one, but we even learned about that during the COVID pandemic. So that's another lineage condition that we see. So we've talked about SIDS, we've talked about ADHD, ADD, and then also autism. And one of the other things that is also really interesting to me is that not only do children mirror not just those hormones like oxytocin and also cortisol, and even some of our neurotransmitters. So I want to talk about that next. And so what we found is with intergenerational and transgenerational trauma, for a lot of mothers, if there had been that trauma there, their dopamine was not where it needed to be. And unfortunately, when we imaged their brains, the mom's brains, what we saw is that there was a lower volume in the brain, basically a signature of trauma. Well, what's curious is that the child showed the same thing. And it was within certain parts of the brain. So if we saw it was in the right side of the brain, we also saw that for the child. And so that white and gray matter was affected. And so, I hear a lot of parents say, I just feel like something else is going on, or I feel like it's my fault. And again, I don't want a parent picking that up. What I want them to do is to feel empowered of us being able to help this child. And so in some cases, we have to assess them and see where their neurotransmitters are, or where their glucose is, or where their cortisol is, and really help them. And children are pretty adaptable, and they're pretty, they're young. They've got this young tissue, and they're so much more adaptable than us adults. And usually if you get them the right thing, again, you got to get them the right food, you got to get them the right movement, you got to get them the right assessment. And if they have all that in the right team, these kids can heal beautifully. And I've seen homeopathy, if you've ever heard of that before, to be so effective for a lot of children who have been on the spectrum, but also have a lot of irregular conditions where, like, mom and dad feel like maybe it's something within the lineage. So I hope that this was inspiring. I think it's a conversation that a lot of parents are afraid to have. They want to have it, but they don't know who to have it with. And there's a lot of shame and blame that people can carry. And I just, if you're a parent out there right now, I don't want you carrying this. I want you to take this and really feel empowered to help your child, and to recognize that this, as soon as you start doing some of the work on yourself and start getting them help, it really helps to the whole family, the whole lineage, right? And so I don't want you feeling discouraged. I want you to feel encouraged, empowered, and know that there is so much hope for your child if you're struggling. All right, thank you so much for being with me. Great being with you. If you have any questions, please reach out. Take good care. Until next time.